What's up, guys? This is TheKephas. Today I'm going to show you some macros that I've created with GNOME Sequencer Enhanced, an extremely powerful add-on that allows you to create robust macros that can perform most, if not all, of your rotation with a single button. This can be extremely useful if you have a disability like myself, or if you just want to be lazy. Bear in mind that these macros can be extremely helpful, but they also have their limits, so they're made primarily for those who are playing the game at a more casual level. But feel free to use them as you see fit. If you'd like to learn more about GNOME Sequencer and how to use it, I recommend that you head over to Wow Lazy Macros. You can find links to all of that and to import strings for these macros in the description. Today we are going to be checking out the macro that I have created for Brewmaster monks. Now, I was really surprised at how easy it was to make a macro for Brewmasters. Much like Windwalker monks, Brewmasters have always given me a little bit of a challenge. Depending on the expansion, depending on the play style, there's always been a couple of things that I've had to kind of work out. And with a specific build, it's made macroing this class a whole lot easier. Though, you know, much like with Windwalker monks, there are a lot of abilities that can be used in this rotation, depending on what direction you go in your talent tree, and you're going to have to pick up some extra ones to really make it work anyways. So it did take a little bit of, you know, messing around with the builds, and finally I settled on something that I think works pretty well. So before we take a look at the macro itself, let's go and open up the talent tree and look at that build. And yeah, so the thing about, like, you know, a build like this, I mean, this is kind of like you know, when I make my builds, I tend to go with a build that is easy to play, hopefully, or at the very least easy for a macro to perform as much of as possible. And I feel like this build does a pretty good job of this, though I don't know, you know, how like min-maxy this is. I mean, I'm not really, you know, we talk about this a lot when we do our builds for macros. We don't really focus so much on min-maxing as we do on, like I said, you know, making sure the macro can work and you know, work out the class as much as possible. So that's kind of the idea. So just want to, like, I always try to get that disclaimer out there the best way I can, but especially in this case, this is of course a tanking class, you know, and so a lot of it is, you know, making sure that you're doing your job as a tank. So, you know, feel free to use this, like, especially like when you're doing outdoor content. If you like running around as a brewmaster, maybe this can help you out. But anyway, this is the build that we're going with, you know, right now for this. And like I said, I think it does a lot. But on the left side is the monk side of the tree, and there's not a whole lot to go over here, really. I mean, you have a lot of utility, a lot of options that you could take. Obviously, I mean, you're probably going to want to pick up Fortifying Brew if you're a tank. It's very helpful, you know. But really, there's not a whole lot of like requirements in terms of the macro. In fact, I could probably change some of this around myself and improve it myself. But, you know, this is what I've gone with. The key, you know, things in this, I guess, that you want to make note of are the fact that I've gone with Chi Wave as over Chi Burst, right? And the reason why is that Chi Burst has a cast time. And when you're playing a melee character and every other ability is instant cast, having one ability with a really short cast time when you're moving around and you don't know when it's going to go off is not ideal. And long story short, Chi Burst works better in the macro, straight up. And so that's why I almost always go with Chi Burst, you know, so it's pretty straightforward. Now, we haven't taken any of these bottom talents at all. We've just done a lot of other utility, buffing certain abilities and whatnot. So, you know, nothing extra there. So really the only thing to even acknowledge is take Chi Wave if you, you know, for the macro. Otherwise, pretty much everything else is, you know, going to be covered. So this side of the tree, the Brewmaster side, is obviously where all the important stuff comes into play here. And, you know, we have taken some talents that I didn't take with Windwalker Monk. There are some shared talents in here, but we, you know, I feel like they're really helpful for Brewmaster, and they're really relatively easy to macro, but we'll get into that. So obviously, you know, things like Breath of Fire, we're going to take that. One of the ones I'm mentioning here, of course, is Bone Dust Brew. We'll get into how this works in the actual macro itself. You know, a lot of the, you know, staple abilities being added for Brewmaster monks. You know, Invoke Newzow, this will not be included in the macro just because it's more of a a tanky cooldown, and so putting in the macro is not ideal. Besides that, though, I mean, pretty much everything else is just like a lot of it's passives, right? And so you don't really have to worry too much about what you're doing. I did not take Rushing Jade Wind. I went with the other option just because it just didn't seem necessary. To add that extra ability in, but if you could take it if you wanted to. It's just that you have to add it to the macro. But the key to this build and what makes this macro work so easily is this talent down here, where you have a choice between a new ability called Weapons of Order, which has a really long cooldown, or an ability that essentially removes Tiger Palm from your rotation. And so if we're going to choose between removing an ability and adding an ability, we're going to take the macro or the talent that removes an ability, because that's going to make the macro even easier to function. On top of that, not only does this make it passive, this is an ability, Tiger Palm, which uses energy. And Tiger Palm as a Brewmaster Monk is the ability that makes a Brewmaster Monk more difficult to macro, because you need to have enough energy to use Keg Smash. And without Tiger Palm, that's not a problem. So you're really, the only two abilities that you're going to use Keg Smash on, as based on my recollection, if I remember right, are Keg Smash and Spinning Crane Kick, which you're only going to use occasionally when you're fighting multiple enemies, right? So when you're fighting a single target, you're not going to worry about that. And so now basically energy is more or less not important. You're going to always have enough energy to use Keg Smash, and you're never going to have to worry about using Tiger Palm. So it makes the macro very easy, because essentially what this does is it turns the Brewmaster Monk into a class that just uses a bunch of cooldowns, and that is always going to be the best class to macro. So it made my job very easy, but it's very essential that you do pick this talent here over Oath Weapons of Order. Now the only thing is, if you're leveling a Brewmaster Monk and you're below the point where you can get this, I mean, you want to try to get this as soon as possible. But if you're not at a point where you've unlocked this talent yet, then obviously Tiger Palm is not going to be included in the macro. So you're going to have to manage Tiger Palm on a separate button or throw it in the macro. But of course, then you're going to have to deal with energy and Keg Smash, and it was not fun until I decided to go with that talent. So yeah, so that was the big thing that saved this macro and gave me a build that works. So that's the key here. Pretty much everything else is, like I said, just some staple, Brewmaster abilities. But we'll go over all that in the actual macro itself, which we can do right now. So we're going to open up GNOME Sequencer by typing /GSE, and the macro will be called Kef Brewmaster. This is an all-in-one macro for Brewmaster monks. Obviously, elixirs are not included. I feel like it's just easier to manage those on separate buttons. I guess I could have done modifiers, but I just feel like it's easier to track and manage those on a couple extra buttons. Otherwise, this macro is going to manage your entire rotation. So a couple extra buttons for your brews, I don't think is too big a deal. All right, so if you want to use my build, you can copy this here and paste it into your talent tree, and you'll be good to go there. And like I said, this is one of those rare times where the build is a little bit more essential, at least in terms of getting all the abilities that are included, and also getting the talent that removes Tiger Palm. So yeah, that's kind of important there. So either way, that's pretty much everything there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the macro itself. So with this macro, I'm doing a little bit of what I did with the Windwalker Monk. I've learned a couple of things that hopefully will help make the macro work smoother. Most of your abilities in this rotation have really short cooldowns, with the exception of Touch of Death. This is a little bit of a longer cooldown. It's like a minute and a half. And I mean, pretty much every other ability has like a minute or less. So what I've done is I've put Touch of Death out of the main sequence. So what's going to happen is the macro is going to use Touch of Death, then it's going to lock into the sequence for a couple cycles, and then come back out and try to do Touch of Death again. So the idea here is that the macro is not going to try to use Touch of Death as much as it does all the other abilities, just because it has such a long cooldown, and that's just one less ability that isn't bogging down you trying to cycle through the macro while you're spamming. Okay, so let's get into the actual loop itself. Okay, so the first two abilities are your target location abilities, and that would be Bone Dust Brew and Exploding Keg. These are part of your rotation, and you want to use them on cooldown. The cool thing is you're a melee class, and so if I add in that player command to Bone Dust Brew and Exploding Keg, then it's going to throw those abilities right at your feet. And since you're in melee range, that works out. It kind of works like consecration if you've played a paladin, right? That's kind of the idea. So you just want to make sure that you're in range. You know, we do stuff like this with warriors. We've done this with demon hunters. You know, there's a lot of classes that I use this trick with. And basically, it just makes it so that you can use these abilities and remove the target location effect. For the most part, I don't really see why you would need to put these away from you. I mean, there might be instances where you would want to, but for simplicity, you just run into the pack or run into your enemy, and then just, you know, you start spamming the macro, and then it's going to drop these at your feet. I've made sure to add at combat in this as well to try to prevent you from accidentally dropping these when you're not meaning to, because that always sucks when that happens. But you know, just know that if you're in combat and you spam this and you're not in range, it's going to drop these at your feet. So try to always be near enemies. Okay. So those are the two like more difficult abilities to throw in this macro. But we made them work, right? No big deal. Next up, we have Keg Smash. Again, combat is included there. I'm not really sure how necessary that was, but it is a lot more necessary with Breath of Fire, so that way you're not accidentally casting Breath of Fire, but that is next in this sequence. Followed by Blackout Kick, has a really short cooldown. Rising Sun Kick, Chi Wave, which we've already talked about. These are all instant casts. And then last up is kind of an optional one. I wasn't sure if it would be a good idea to throw this in here or not, and that's Expel Harm. It'll give you some extra healing, and it does do some damage. It's an extra ability to throw in there, though I don't know how good it would be to throw this in here. This is kind of a little bit of a survival ability, but it has a really short cooldown. So I went ahead and threw it in just to, like, you know, the macro will be cycling through all these abilities. It'll use it, give you a little bit of passive healing, but again, it may be better if it wasn't here. It is an extra ability, and as you can see, this loop alone has 8 abilities in here. So you can decide for yourself if you would rather manage Expel Harm outside of the macro, or if you like just having the general passive extra bit of healing, you know, a little bit of extra damage in there. Is it worth wasting a global cooldown on? I honestly don't really know for sure, but you know, for just doing outdoor content, I threw it in, give me a little bit of extra passive healing, and I didn't mind it so much, you know. So obviously if you're at max health and you use it, you're not going to get that passive healing, but it's in there for simplicity, and that's obviously what we go for with these macros. So pretty straightforward stuff there. And then we come down to key press. There is no key release because, weirdly enough, Brewmaster monks do not have any off global cooldown abilities to buff themselves like a lot of other classes do. So that was kind of interesting. So we don't have any key release, but under key press, we have our standard targeting fair, along with start attack, because we are a melee class. We want to make sure that we're always auto attacking. And then you can hold down shift to use spinning crane kick. This is your other, you know, energy user, which is, you know, again, since you don't have Tiger Palm, this is a lot easier because, you know, you're going to have plenty of energy, with the exception of when you use Keg Smash. But yeah, so you just hold down shift when you're in AoE situations to use spinning crane kick as much as you want to or need to or whatever, and you'll be good to go. Obviously, I could have like maybe included this in the macro, but then you're gonna, again, you'd be energy starving yourself, and also it's just not a good ability to be using all the time. You only want to use it when you're in AoE. So, you know, just throwing that in there occasionally. It doesn't really have a cooldown though, so it's easy to use when you want to. Also, you could just, you know, put spinning crane kick on a separate button and use it that way. But either way, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward macro. It's going to keep all of your cooldowns on cooldown, and since it's a class made purely of cooldowns, with the exception of spinning crane kick, which is a modifier, then it's a really easy macro to use. It's not going to use Touch of Death as much as everything else, but it will still try to use it, and you'll still pretty much use it whenever you can. So that's pretty much the idea. It's going to keep everything else on cooldown. Pretty straightforward macro. Ideally, I mean, you know, just give it a shot, see how you feel about it. I don't recommend jumping into a dungeon with this, at least not until you've tested it and seen how it feels first, and gotten a feel for how it works. And then if you want to give that a try, feel free to, but just, you know, remember, you know, you're going to have to manage all your mitigation stuff, all your, you know, brews on separate buttons. You know, maybe if this works well enough for you, then this is a pretty easy way to perform the rotation, while you can focus more on mitigation, positioning, and picking up ads, keeping things on you, that kind of stuff. So maybe it'll help. I mean, maybe it'll make things a little bit easier. I, you know, kind of feel a lot like with this one, like I did my Guardian Druid tank macro build guide, whatever. And, you know, just where it's like the goal is to try to make it as easy as possible, but hopefully be as effective as possible as well. So yeah, just give it a test, see what you think about it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and with all that being said, I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button, and feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is TheKephas. Until next time.